particular conversation. And thank you so much for coming in, Hortense. This is the second time you're here.
Yes.
It's good to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Right, so let's just begin from the general level. This is the 16 days of gender-based, against gender-based violence. And we want to look at, in Kenya, how is this particular, this particular days, how are they commemorated? Okay.
So I'll begin by just what 16 Days of Activism is, or why we celebrate it. It's a civil society initiative supported by the United Nations Secretary General's Office to end violence against women, so all forms of violence against women. It's a call to action to everyone to stop tolerating violence against women. It's a reality around the experiences for survivors and victims who have gone through several forms of gender-based violence. This would include physical abuse, emotional, psychological, issues like child marriages, female genital mutilation, femicide, obstetric violence, and many more. So it's one that shows us, the pervasive nature of violence against, women. Not to say that men do not experience violence, but it disproportionately affects women and girls. In Kenya, it comes at a time when we've seen a lot of rising cases of femicide, as well as issues around, domestic violence continuing on, issues around sexual abuse, rape, defilement, and it's a time when women all over the world, civil society, are calling upon their governments to hold them accountable, to say this must end, and we want to see perpetrators being held to account. It's a call to say that, when this happens, where is justice? How do victims access justice? Where do we report these issues? And even when we report, is there anything that is being done?
I see. Now, let's take a look at something very pertinent that you've mentioned, which are the 4 types of GBV. You've mentioned quite a few. And now, to be specific, we have physical violence, sexual violence, psychological, emotional violence, and economic violence. Now, I want to take a look at the aspect of culture.
Yes.
And if you go to different communities and you speak about GBV, they will define that differently, or they will not actually accept or say that we are actually going through this because it's part of culture, and culture has been with us for eons.
Absolutely.
It's not something new. So when you have such scenarios, how do you sensitize men and women from different communities and try and understand their mindset and then say, hey, this actually isn't healthy, despite the fact that it's passed down from generation to generation?
Thank you, Remy. The first thing that you end up doing is understanding that community. You get to know why that culture exists, why the social norms exist. And from that place, you build up capacity for the community. This includes, empowering the community about the laws that exist, and even looking at the constitution, just from the bare minimum around women not being discriminated against. You'll find that some cultural norms are discriminatory in nature. They tend to be very patriarchal. Yeah, so they support aspects where, women are put down or are seen to be lesser than men, right. Which is not the right thing. The Constitution is very clear around gender equality, around aspects of respectful and dignified treatment of every person, regardless of sex, regardless of gender. So the things that you end up doing is sensitizing the community about the laws that are in place, around dangers of continuing with a harmful culture.
So do you customize these laws to particular communities, or you customize how you sensitize them?
You customize the messages,
right.
Around SGBV, so that they are able to understand. This can also include, speaking in the languages that they speak, so vernacular languages, so that they are able to understand what exactly you're talking about. So it's being very target specific and audience specific to ensure that the messages that you're creating around the culture, around the norms resonate with the people, but they also understand why you want them to transform their culture and their social norms to ensure that they are aligning with the laws of the Constitution as well as international and regional standards.
Right. Now, I want to, of course, welcome to our studio. She's finally here, our other guest and panelist for this matter. She is called Lolo Cynthia. She's a gender analyst. Lolo, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me, and I apologize for coming in late.
We accept your apology. We're happy that you can be part of this conversation. Now, I just was asking Hortense here about, you know, we have the 4 types of, you know, GBV for that matter. We have the physical violence, sexual violence, psychological, emotional, and economic violence. And I was highlighting particularly the aspect of culture, which has been with us for a very long time. We found it. It's been here eons. And sometimes when you want to go to different communities and sensitize them on matters of GBV, some men or women may not quite agree with you. You know, it's part of our culture. In fact, I was listening to a report where some women were agreeing and with the fact that GBV has to be there for a marriage or relationship to last longer. So how do you customize something so important to communities, men and women, to understand?
Well, just to piggyback on what you said, which is quite brilliant, I think a lot of this has to go back to re-education. People don't know what they don't know. So the woman who says that GBV is part of, like, that's love. Like your husband is meant to beat you because he actually loves you, and that's the way he's correcting maybe a past behavior. So we need to go into these communities and re-educate them, because most of them have blind spots that they don't even know exist. So when we teach them other norms, when we introduce them to healthy sense of self and healthy expression, whether it's rejection, anger, and also build the agency of these women, we're able to move them from where they currently are into a new sphere. And I know most times when it comes to culture, most of the people who continue to perpetrate culture are women themselves. So we think it's women. When we talk about FGM, the men really do not care about FGM. It's women that undergo that procedure, because to them it's also a rite of passage. You know, it's something that they believe that if you do not do it, you're actually alienating us and making us feel like the other. So most of this conversation, I think we also have to have a place for empathy. Because most times they might want to change, but that means now they're in a position, because if I tell you you've been abused, or we talk about abuse and violence, and you recognize yourself in those scenarios, the next question is, what do I do next? What am I going? Do I have the capacity to actually do what is required of me? So sometimes people do not want to deal with the cognitive dissonance that comes with education, so they also stay in the current position and that they're currently in, and shame as well, because now people know that something is happening to me. But if you live in a community where it's happening to you, it's happening to, I mean, we're all the same. That's just how men are. So coming in and trying to re-educate them is really the most important, but we have to understand that it's going to take a long time. We have to do it from a place of love, from a place of empathy, and also bring men into these conversations as well, because men listen to more men due to sexism, but women listen to men as well. So if we get men in our communities and talk to them and say, we want to re-educate, because as much as men are holding on to power and wanting to dictate and control women, we do have a new set of men who are ready to see their women thrive. So if we're able to bring those kind of men into our communities and discussion and make them influencers in that community and gatekeepers, and they take this conversation back into their home, it gives the women in their life the permission to actually speak out and dream of other forms of being as well.
Right. We also need to look at now, let's bring it to the urban centers, and generally even everywhere. I mean, even if we say rural centers, there are also aspects of urbanization that in this conversation would still affect them in that particular way. Patriarchy has been a key thing, and one of the conversations women are having is, we have very powerful women CEOs, or even in their different fields of work, who are very influential, but they face a lot of violence when they go back home. I was listening to a conversation, and a lady was saying this lady is dominating at work, and she's having, you know, these meetings, high profile meetings, and then maybe she goes to a cocktail later on, as it is in the workplaces, and then she goes home late, and her husband is, what audacity do you have, you know, to come down? But those are women, are us. You know, you're sitting, you're looking a particular way, but you're facing something that is very tormenting. Just paint us that dynamic, the power struggle there.
I would begin by saying, when you think about sexual and gender-based violence, you cannot escape the fact that it's, you know, entrenched in gender inequality. When you look at the roles that society has, you know, placed on men and women, they're very different. You know, women are taught to be, you know, homemakers, quote unquote, and therefore when you move out of the home and you take up, you know, a leadership position or a position of power, you're still expected by society to conform to certain norms, to certain, you know, cultural values that still put you down in terms of who you are as a woman. If we look at the Kenyan context, the two-third gender rule in the parliament, you know, it should have been a very easy decision to implement, to ensure that, you know, women are included, you know, in places of power. But you know, if you walk through the journey that Kenya has had with that, you know, just that rule, it's been difficult.
It's not yet implemented.
To implement, now. Yes, because, you know, when you speak up, when you're talking about, you know, women in places of decision making, women in places of power, there's an aspect where you're told this is not your place.
I need you to hold on to that point. Lola will also give you get your perspective. We're taking a short break. We'll be back with more of this conversation. Do stay with us.
At People Daily, we believe small actions lead to monumental changes. As we commit to a greener future, embrace simple steps, reduce, reuse, and recycle. It's time to go green. Kua Green. Switch off unused lights, opt for reusables over disposables, and support eco-friendly